Start the recording. All right. And we will kick off with some updates from Jim, and then I will introduce our speakers for today. So I'll just hand it off to Jim to start us off.
Cool. Thanks everyone. Welcome to our July Advocacy Connect, City Advocacy Connect. So this is our opportunity for folks to kind of drop in and just hear about the latest and greatest with our City of Chicago-based advocacy campaigns at Active Transportation Alliance. And we're excited to have Eladio from McKinley Park Development Council and Matthew from the Chicago Park District with us today to give us some exciting updates about some trail-related work, both existing and hopefully soon to exist trails. Given that summertime, we thought it would be a good opportunity to hear what's going on with all that. So, but before we hand it over to them, just wanted to do kind of a quick little roundup of what's happening in kind of sustainable transportation advocacy in the city. First and foremost, if you don't know, you should know, Bike to Drive registration is open. It's on September 1st. This is Active Transportation Alliance's biggest fundraiser of the year. It helps power our advocacy and our work. So if you can attend or volunteer, go to biketodrive.org. We'd love to have you there. It's always a fun event. And we have a good time. But this week we saw we had some exciting mobilizing and a nice advocacy win on the transit front. Folks may have heard there was a proposal to extend the number 9 Ashland CTA bus, which currently ends at Clark and Irving Park, and extending that, continuing up Ashland to the Ravenswood Metro Station, which would be a really nice logical connection in our regional transit system. And there were, of course, some kerfuffles about people were complaining about the bus going in front of, the house that they live in the city, the third largest city and the biggest, one of the biggest countries in the world, but whatever. And so we put out the call to have folks go and show up to testify at city council, where there was a committee hearing on the proposed extension. And we had a really good showing, both people submitting written comments and folks actually showing up to testify, despite the meeting starting 1 hour late, which is just wild. Your government at work, I guess. And we were successful in showcasing the support and didn't let the naysayers have the day, and the proposed extension got the support it needed from the committee. So that's moving forward, but a nice little win from the movement. It was kind of a little bit of a last second mobilization, and it was awesome to see so many different groups and individuals work together on that. So thanks to everyone who was a part of that. Our Safe Streets for All campaign, we've been working on pushing to lower the default speed limit in the city of Chicago, and to continue investing in safe streets infrastructure. And we had a really good subject matter hearing on lowering the speed limit earlier in the spring, in May, that you can check out on the city clerk's website if you haven't seen it. But we've been pushing to move forward with some actual policy change around the speed limit since then. And we hope to have more updates soon on the next steps for that campaign, and I'll just leave it at that for now. So stay tuned for more exciting updates, hopefully on the speed limit front soon. But we're going to need your help when that happens to reach out to your aldermen and let them know that you support sensible speeds on our roadways. It's one of the kind of easiest ways that we can help address serious injuries and fatalities on Chicago streets. Another thing that's kind of popping right now, that's we just kind of received word of, is the long epic saga of North DuSable Lakeshore Drive. And so for the last 10 years, the state and the city have been engaged or embroiled, some might say, in a planning process around rebuilding the northern end of DuSable Lakeshore Drive from like Grand up to Hollywood. We and other organizations have throughout that entire time been pushing for something that highlights, a more sustainable, future-looking lakefront, including, something that's rich with options for walking, biking, and transit, and reducing car capacity in favor of a more sustainable transportation corridor. We have received word that the project is moving forward, and there's going to be a public meeting in early August, on August 8th. So we want to kind of put that on people's calendars now. We're not entirely sure what's going to be happening at that meeting, but we're concerned they're going to be presenting a pretty terrible alternative as the thing that they want to build. So it might be kind of an all hands on deck moment to talk about North Lakeshore Drive and getting the highway off of our lakefront, so we could have more places for Matthew to build trails. We're not going to put him on the spot about about that project. But anyway, so stay tuned for more on that. There's been a lot of great advocacy happening over the last month or so on the North DuSable Lakeshore Drive from a lot of different groups and individuals. So Chicago Bike Grid Now worked to get a really great letter published by a bunch of different aldermen calling for a more sustainable option for the lakefront. And the General Assembly also passed a resolution calling for something similar. So there's been a lot of really good advocacy happening, and we're not out of the woods yet. So save the date for 8/8, I guess, is the update on North DuSable Lakeshore Drive. Finally, last but certainly not least, I did want to flag, people may have seen in the news today, this week, we had the first, not we, but like the collective, the rail we, the first of what will be several subject matter hearings by the state Senate on the proposed transit reform legislation took place. And so the first one was held in the Blandick Building downtown here in Chicago. There are going to be a series of at least 4 more subject matter hearings, each kind of spotlighting a different aspect of kind of the transit reform package and different constituencies and things like that. So coming up on the 24th, there's going to be a South Suburban subject matter hearing. Then there's going to be some in the collar counties on the 8th. There's going to be a collar county one for DuPage, Will, and Kendall, one for Kane and McKinley on the 28th, and then they're going to wrap up with Lake and Northwestern Cook County in like mid-September. So this is kind of like the next phase of what folks probably saw like a month or two ago when this new package of transit reform legislation and funding legislation was introduced, that was built off of a process that came before that called the Plan of Action for Regional Transit. And so we've been kind of on this train for the last like year and a half to work with state leaders to really address the kind of major governance and funding crises facing our regional transit system. And this now we're in this phase where the leaders in the state Senate and the House of Representatives are kind of socializing the legislation through these different subject matter hearings. But it's also an opportunity for people to share their own thoughts and get on the record and provide testimony. So if that's something that you're interested in being a part of, stay tuned. Either reach out to us or feel free to look up those hearing dates yourself. And with that, I think I can shut my yapper. There's a lot going on, so we wanted to make sure folks were briefed on everything going on. But we're excited now to move on to the programmatic part.
Thanks, Jim. Just giving some quick introductions, and then I'll hand it off to our speakers who we're excited for you all to hear about. So first off, we have Matthew, who is a lakefront planner with Chicago Park District. And if people haven't seen or gone on the Lakefront Trail, there have been some new bollards installed. So it's great to have Matthew here talk to us about their plan with getting the Lakefront Trail to be more safer and just to give us overall updates with what they're planning with the Lakefront Trail with kind of the going summer. And then we have Eladio, who is a project manager with the McKinley Park Development Council. And they recently just put out a really great riverfront plan looking at south of Peton Park to Western Avenue along the South Branch. So it is great to have both of them speak about the projects and plans they've been working on. We have about 20 minutes for each. And if you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A. And we'll go from there and answer them at the end. And I will hand it off to Matthew, who has a presentation for us.
Thanks. Let me pull my screen up. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Great. So yeah, thank you to Active Transportation Alliance for inviting me to speak this afternoon. My name is Matthew Santagata. I'm the Lakefront Planning Coordinator with the Park District, and I had the privilege of being able to work on some of our recent Lakefront Trail safety improvements. I am an avid cyclist myself. I use the Lakefront Trail almost every day in the summertime. These were not only a priority for the Park District, but for my own personal beliefs as well. This really stemmed from complaints that we were receiving from the general public and information from other agencies about cars accessing both the Lakefront Trail and adjacent green space in an unauthorized manner. So we basically conducted a study, identified some of the major areas where cars were able to access the trail, looked at the reasons why we believed that they were accessing it, did an internal design review, did a coordinated design review with other outside agencies, and now we're currently in the construction implementation phase. And one thing I really want to emphasize is just how important public feedback was in making these changes occur. I was receiving a lot of super helpful information from a lot of cyclists on the trail who were sending me photos, location, times, where they saw cars on the trail. And that really gave me evidence that I was then able to use to advocate for these changes. So I really want to emphasize how important it is to reach out to us when you see something that shouldn't be happening. And to that end, after my presentation, I'll put my email address in the chat. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or see something, want to make us aware of something. So with that being said, scroll. So before getting into the specific targeted areas and the interventions we had, I just want to go over some of the challenges that we faced when doing any sort of work on the Lakefront Trail. Safety, of course, we have so many different types of users. We have people on e-bikes, on bicycles, walking strollers, jogging. And within those camps, we have people who like to use the trail differently. So whenever we're making any sort of design choice, we want to make sure that we are protecting every user's safety, but then also not hindering how they prefer to interact with the trail. Interagency coordination, obviously the Park District owns and manages the trail, but it exists in a kind of complex municipal ecosystem where a lot of other agencies rely on the trail, use it, or are bound to it through regulation. I think one example I would highlight, and I'm not sure how many people are aware of this, but whenever we have an intervention that is within a certain distance of an IDOT right-of-way, we need IDOT's approval to move forward with it, even if it's on our property. So that means, we have oftentimes different design standards, different priorities that we need to reconcile, and that can be challenging. And then Of course, CDOT manages the bridges and harbors, so they often need to cross over the Lakefront Trail and assist with that. So we have to make sure we're working hand in hand with other agencies. Emergency services, of course, we want to prevent unauthorized vehicles from accessing the trail. Oftentimes, so we need to make sure that first responders can get out there and are not inhibited by physical design barriers. So that can be really challenging, is preventing some people, but not everyone. Operations and management. So the trail is used by almost all of the Park District departments. So we have, Department of Natural Resources who often need to cross the trail and bring vehicles out there to maintain some of those beautiful natural areas, do landscaping. We have trash collection. During the summer, all the programming staff sometimes needs to get out there. Vendors need to access the lakefront. When we have special events, we need to make sure security are not locked in by gates. So there's a lot of internal coordination that needs to happen. And then lastly, enforcement. The Park District does not have the ability to enforce any rules or regulations or laws along the Lakefront Trail. We rely on the Chicago Police Department to do that. So that all being said, there's no one size fits all solution for design challenges along the trail. It's really dependent on all these usages, logistics, regulations that we need to consider. So jumping into some of the targeted areas that we've been working on. Unfortunately, I don't have any visuals showing the actual new designs, but we can go over those in detail. I also want to say this is not a comprehensive list of all improvements. This is always going to be an ongoing process. We're kind of locked in an unfortunate game of whack-a-mole. But yeah, we are committed to responding to these challenges as we identify them. The first one we are pointing out is Belmont Harbor North, is what we're calling it, where we had cars driving on Belmont Harbor Drive. There's a lot of poor wayfinding and signage and a lot of faded road markers. So we often had cars turning south and then ending up onto the Lakefront Trail instead of heading towards the harbor. We also found that, like I said, a lot of authorized vehicles need to use the trail at times. Whenever we do that, we usually have cell phones on us. And because of that, cell phone mapping apps begin registering the trail as a place where cars can be driving. So over time, we'll find that mapping apps start to route people onto the trails inadvertently. So we had a lot of that happening here. So some of the solutions for this area were totally rehabilitating the surface intersection markings. So we had trail markings, we had speed bumps and markings for the speed bumps, stop signs, signage for authorized vehicles only, trail signage, and then a kind of a brightly striped buffer zone that extends the width of the road, alternating in green and white, just kind of guiding cars to stay on the path. Next location, we're calling Belmont Harbor South. This was two separate conflict areas. We had cars on Belmont Ave driving over the curb and then onto the Lakefront Trail. So we erected bollards along here, and then this other conflict zone approaching the harbor. We have lots of cars carrying boats and trailers trying to access a crane and this dry storage area, and oftentimes would end up turning south onto the trail itself versus going into that parking lot. So we also have bollards, a traffic control gate that can be locked, and then additional signage and surface paintings, kind of, again, guiding cars straight ahead to the parking lot. Next was, again, Gustavo Harbor. We have cars driving on Randolph Street that would end up just going straight ahead and accessing the trail So here we also erected bollards, and then I believe also have north and south traffic control gates that are locked. But if CDOT, for whatever reason, needs to get vehicles out to the harbor, they can unlock those and get out there. Burnham Harbor, this was another challenging one. So the sidewalk here is graded down to the street and very wide and flat, so it's very inviting for cars to drive north and south onto the trail. And another challenge was we were finding that cyclists really got good speed going along this section, so we wanted to be wary of any physical barriers that would get in the way of that. So here we also have totally rehabbed all the surface paintings. So that's a bright white and green striped buffer zone crossing the trail. That's speed bumps, markings, signage, all meant to kind of curb that behavior. Promontory Point was another problem area. Here we identified 2 locations. The first on 55th Street, we had a lot of cars that would drive up onto the sidewalk along this path and then take the underpass beneath Lakeshore Drive. There was a bollard in place there that a couple different agencies had keys for, but we were finding that it kept being left down. So cars would just freely be able to drive into the park. So what we did was added bollards along 55th Street for the sidewalk area so that cars could no longer drive up. And then kind of out of the way in a less conspicuous area, we have a traffic control access gate here that's locked. So if any agencies do need to use this path, they can drive around and then up that gate. And the other major area, so driving north on Lakeshore Drive, we have this turnoff that pulls off into the park. And this is primarily meant for event staff working at the field house to coordinate like external vendors, all the sort of event logistics that need to happen. Originally, there were some concrete barriers here. I believe IDOT had placed them. At some point, they had been removed and no one had been notified. So this was completely accessible to the public. So we had cars driving north here. So what we are doing, I believe the gate is currently being manufactured, but we're having this large like traffic control gate here so that we can keep it locked, and then when vendors do need to access the site, they can pull off, unlock it, and then head up into Promontory. So those were the only project areas that were a part of this iteration. Again, this is an ongoing process. It's something that unfortunately we're going to have to keep working towards solving, but it is very important to be tackling this. I think it's also important to note that not just being reactive, we need to be proactive, and that at this point is integrating trail safety studies into our design development processes for new developments along the lakefront. So whenever we have some new project happening, kind of using that as an opportunity to look at the existing trail connections and make sure everything is safe as well. An example of that, the Morgan Shoal development between 47th and 51st. As part of that, we're kind of taking the lessons that we've learned here and applying them to that area. So, you know, as the Park District continues to work along the lakefront, make sure that these considerations are baked into any design processes that we have. And then I know Jim mentioned the North Lakeshore Drive redevelopment. As a result of that, the Park District is gaining a lot of additional extra park space. And that covers a lot of the areas that we covered here. And that space is going to allow us to like expand trail separation, have way more robust safety measures, eliminate some of those conflict zones, and really isolate roadways, access roads from the trail network which previously was not part of the design consideration. And then also a lot of those east-west access points we're able to totally redevelop as well to make sure that when bikes are and pedestrians are coming onto the trail, that they are safe. But again, I'm going to put my email address in the chat. Feel free to reach out if you have questions, comments, concerns. Unfortunately, I have another meeting conflict, so I won't be able to stay for the Q&A session. But I'm happy to have a dialogue with you off screen. And yeah, again, it's so important for us to hear from the public as to any issues that they experience along the Lakefront Trail. I really think no one knows it quite as well as the recreational users who are out there every day. And that's just a huge benefit to us and a huge resource to us at the Park District. So with that, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. That was really awesome to hear. There is a question for you in the chat box. If you just want to answer that on the chat, that's great. And a lot of you want to get your slides ready, hand it off to you.
Thank you. Let me share here. All right, here we go. So again, my name is Eladio Montenegro. I'm with the McKinley Park Development Council. We spent the last year working on this framework plan centered around connecting the riverfront from Western all the way up to Pington Park. We worked with Coalition for Better Chinese American Community, Bridgeport Alliance, Open Lands, and the landscape architecture firm Living Habitats. And this was funded by a grant from the Chicago Community Trust. At the end of it, we put together this really awesome 90-page document, which is what I'll be using as our slideshow, because I want to make sure we focus on that as much as possible. So I'll skim through it and focus on the big parts. But Alex, if you could drop the link to it so that folks can follow along if they want. Oh, there it is. Yeah, so if you guys click on that link, you'll be able to see the document and zoom in on any parts you want. So again, the goal of the framework plan is to create a framework plan to connecting the lakefront from Western Avenue to Pington Park. So this just serves as, again, a guide for future plans or work on how to connect these separate parts of the river. There are currently a few parks scattered throughout, and in the following sections, I'll talk about some of the work we did. But this all builds on 2 decades of previous planning done by other community groups, by the city, and we're just continuing their work, hoping to get folks to start moving on some of this stuff. But our objectives, again, provide a continuous trail from Western to Pington Park, improve mobility, safety, and accessibility for pedestrians and cyclists, connect the adjacent neighborhoods, so Bridgeport, Chinatown, McKinley Park, Little Village, Brighton Park, all disconnected by the river, railroad tracks, big streets, and this trail will help connect all these neighborhoods. And then also to create a cohesive sense of place along the South Branch. You know, on the north side, downtown, the riverfront is an asset for them, right? It's a place to go, it's somewhere cool. And for us on the south side, it's like factories and like contaminated land. So the idea is to make it an asset for the neighborhood. And then expand and improve active public spaces along the South Branch, encourage improvement and environmental cleanup of the properties, and then provide equitable access to the riverfront for all of our neighborhoods, for all of our neighbors and residents. So chapter 2 covers our community engagement. So over the whole year, we did several community engagement events. Hopefully some of you guys made it out or heard about them. But we had 6 events over 5 months. We talked to hundreds of people, collected hundreds of surveys, and we used all that info to help put this framework plan together so that we would make suggestions that are what people wanted, what the neighbors wanted, and not just what we thought would be our best practices. So again, we did hundreds of surveys. If you guys want to look at it and see all the details, but we collected, demographic info about race, age, where people lived from, and we had events in all 3 neighborhoods, right? In McKinley Park, Brighton Park, Chinatown. We had pop-up events on the riverfront to let people know that it existed. Our first event at the Halsted Riverwalk, we had about 40 people come through, and I'd say 9 out of 10 didn't know that the Riverwalk existed, that it was something that they could use. So that helped us kind of adjust our questions to center around, like, do you ever go to the riverfront, right? Is it something that you visit? If you, how would you use it? What would you like to see? And then we did events, holiday markets, senior bingo events, so that we could get feedback from not just our young folks, but from our seniors in the neighborhoods. Chinatown, Bridgeport, and McKinley Park have a very large senior community, so we want to make sure we heard their voices. And then we did a focus group at Park 571 at the boathouse, where we had 50 different participants. And then we had a final charrette in McKinney Park. We had over 100 people come through to give us their feedback. That was a final event, super crazy, and NPR promoted it, and we had a huge turnout. But from these events, we found out that folks want to be able to walk and bike from one end to the other, right? They just want somewhere to go where they can relax and be away from high-stress streets like Archer and Ashland, which aren't very pedestrian friendly. They want more park amenities and places to go. We have, parks scattered throughout, but, your parks on the riverfront aren't very easy to get to. So making them easier to get to and giving people somewhere to go was what we heard a lot. And then folks would like to build on the branch's history of industry, and connect the adjacent neighborhoods. A huge request for art and something nice to look at was what a lot of folks wanted. And then a lot of people wanted environmental and sustainable growth, right? They want these lands to be cleaned up and used for something positive for the neighborhood, and not just more warehouses or polluters like asphalt plants or metal recycling plants, which we have a lot of in the neighborhoods now. And then equitable, inclusive use of the land. A lot of our seniors and a lot of our older folks very concerned that this would turn into a 606 type situation where, we make something nice for the neighborhood and then nobody can afford to live here anymore because we all get priced out. So fear of being driven out of the neighborhood was a huge piece of feedback. And then folks want proper use of the land, right? They want it to be green space, they want it to be housing, and a mix of all the things, less heavy industry. Chapter 3 covers our existing conditions, so the properties that we have along the river. So over the year, we took an inventory of all the properties along this about 3-mile stretch. Who owns them? Are they planning to sell? And then what we can do to prep for when they eventually do turn over. So we broke it up into 3 sections, which is Western to Damon, Damon to Halsted, and then Halsted over to Pinktown Park. And through these sections, we have a variety of property owners. So starting at Western Avenue, we have the daily boat launch, which again, most neighborhood folks didn't know that there's a boat launch on Western Avenue. It's kind of hidden. You have to get across 2, 4, 6, 8 lanes of traffic to get from one side of Western to the other. So only the folks who have boats know that this is somewhere where you can come and drop your boat and get to the lake. So the city has proposed plans to improve the Western Avenue Bridge, and we've been advocating for them to create a crosswalk. As it stands right now, from 26th Street to 35th, there is nowhere to cross. You have almost 10 blocks where you can't get from one end to the other. So it's a huge barrier for folks to get to that boat launch. And then starting on the other side of Western, we have dark pink properties, which are properties that are slated to change ownership. The current city riverfront guidelines require that anyone who buys property on the river and develops it has to build a riverfront trail. So as these properties turn over, and they build something, they'll be required to build a trail. So we know that, if you guys follow the news, the Damon silos will be turning over soon, or they have been sold. They're going to build something, and we're going to get a trail. We would like it to be something nice, but either way, we'll get a trail. But the first one is a telecommunications property called SageNet, currently for sale. We're keeping track of them, hoping that turns into a trail. And then between them is a huge chunk of land owned by BNSF Railroad. No plans to sell or do anything with it. You guys probably know working with railroads is difficult, but we've been in talks with them to see if they'll let us have an easement to connect these two ends. Slow, but they haven't said no yet, so we're hopeful. And they own a huge chunk of land that is just overgrown green. And so our plan would be to just cut a path through it to connect these two ends that would connect to the Damon silos. Current plans are to demolish them. We would like them to kind of like an icon in the neighborhood. But either way, if they get torn down or if they stay, we'll get a trail that would connect you to the current parks, which is Canal Port Riverwalk. And then across the street on Ashland is Canal Origins Park. So we have the potential into the next few years for there to be a connection from current parks from Ashland to Damon, and then hopefully from Damon to Western. And then again, Archer, very, very busy street. Our goal is to get folks off of there. So our second section is from Ashland to Halsted. On Ashland, we currently have several parks. We have Canal Origins Park, the Park 571 Boathouse. Future goals would be to have a bridge that would connect these two parks so that folks can get from one end to the other. We have a train station on Ashland Avenue, one of the busiest stations on the Orange Line, but very hard to get to. There's a whole community here, which is cut off by the expressway and viaducts. A bridge over Bubbly Creek would allow them to go from the neighborhood to the train station and cut about 20 minutes off of their walking commute to get to the train station. And it would help us connect these parks to create, again, a continuous trail. But once you get onto the other side of the river, we have the Boathouse, which used to be People's Gas Lot, Superfund site, which means it was extra contaminated. Next to them is a current People's Gas property lot, which we've spoken to them. They plan to do an environmental cleanup of that property and finish that sometime in 2025. They won't tell us what they're going to do with it afterwards, but we're assuming that if they're cleaning up their property, they're going to sell it or build something on it. At which point, if someone builds something on there, they have to build a trail. So that would connect Park 571 to Loomis, which is a connection to Pilsen. We hope to acquire that piece of property and just make it one big park. On the other side of Loomis is a property called Brandenburg. We talked to them, right? So they may undergo transition. We spoke to their property owners. They said, yep, we're moving our stuff out to the burbs and we plan to sell. So we're just keeping an eye on them to see what happens. That is also a Superfund site, right? Which means it's extra contaminated. It would require a good chunk of money to remediate it. But once someone builds something on there, we get another trail. Next to them is a ComEd substation. They have about 15 feet already separated from the riverfront, which we're talking to them about a potential trail along there. ComEd, not super friendly, not easy to work with, but again, they haven't said no yet. They asked us for drawings and we provided them, so we're hoping that moves forward. And then once we get to Halsted, next to the ComEd substation is the only part of the south side that has a riverfront trail built to the current river guidelines. A company called Prologis bought the empty lot, built a warehouse, and they had to build a trail. So it's a really nice trail, which I'll show pictures of later on. But that's already there, and very nice trail. That drops you off onto Halsted. The other side of Halsted is, so from Halsted to Pinktown Park is mostly businesses that their warehouses or buildings run up right to the river, which means that there is no space for a riverwalk because they're building and then like maybe 4 feet for a fire escape and then the river. So for this section, we have to take the street, right? Right at Halsted, there's a little knee wall which connects to a piece of property owned by Canadian National Railroad. We're also in talks with them to do maybe an easement that would allow us to connect to a back street off of Archer, and it would run along the railroad. So, we're working through that one. After that is just the gravel road for a lot behind Archer, which connects to this building called the Pacifica. That one was recently sold. They're going to be turning that into a mixed use like hotel retail. We're working with them to put a bike lane in front of their building that would connect to the rest of our trail, continue it forward. And then after that, we have a city-owned lot right on Cermak and Canal. They said they're going to put that one up for sale. Someone buys it, we get a trail. After that, we have Lawrence Fishery. They're not going anywhere, but they already have a dock, and we talked to them, and they're like, yeah, whatever you guys want to do, we're happy. Whatever brings more traffic to our place, they're happy to cooperate with us. So, and then on the other side, we have a yacht yard, and then finally we get to Pinktown Park, which we think will be our most difficult piece, because at the end of Pinktown Park is like 4 different railroads and a bridge that's actively used. So that's one of our biggest challenges for us. We have low clearance, an active bridge, and a bunch of railroads that work through there. So chapter 4 covers our connectivity plan, so what we would like to do. And obviously that's connect everything, right, from Western to Pinktown Park. We've listed a few alternatives. If we can't get, the railroads to cooperate, or if properties don't sell, then we've outlined different routes that folks can take to go from one place to the other. And we're actively working with our wards to see if we can turn those alternative streets into greenways where folks can bike ride to get from one side to the other. But all of our suggestions center around using what we already have. So we know that, the railroad isn't going anywhere. We know that the I-55 isn't going anywhere. So our suggestions center around using what's there, right? Doing simple, easy to do construction that incorporates the history of the neighborhood, which is an industrial corridor. One of our big recommendations is making sure our trail entrances are well lit, that signage is up. Wayfinding is a big issue for us on the South Branch. There are several parks, but they're not easy for you to see. You drive down Ashland and see that there's 2 parks on either side on the river. There's no signage for them, so wayfinding is important, and making sure that our entrances are well lit and welcoming. And a big piece is getting people close to and onto the water. We already have a lot of that in the city, so it's something that we want to do on our end. And then continuing to plant, local natural foliage, local trees, and creating habitat for our fish and wildlife. And then creating public spaces, give people something to go to and something to see, and incorporating, again, our train stations, our viaducts, our bridges, to create inviting, nice places to go to. And then we cover our recommendations on how we would connect these things, right? So, the boat launch, you got to get across Western. A lot of our recommendations for these big streets are to go under the bridges, like we do downtown, creating bridges under bridges. And so all that requires working with CDOT, with IDOT, Army Corps of Engineers. We've had conversations with all of them, and we're working to move these plans forward. And so at our Damon Silo site, we'd like to see a bridge over one of the slips, natural green access for folks to just sit and be by the river. The Damon Silos, Park 571, everything around Ashland has a great view of the downtown area. So our goals are to create a view that could look that way. And so again, we know that, we have our viaducts, we have our pillars, we have our concrete walls, and we have recommendations on how we can, we have to keep all that stuff. We can at least make it look nice, right? If we need wayfinding, why can't we put it on a pillar, right? Like we have in these images. If we have to have concrete walls, let's add some art so that they look more inviting and friendly. And then one of the big things that we would like to see, and that we know folks in the neighborhood like to see, is the bridge connecting Park 571 to Canal Origins across Ashland. And we already have ideas where those bridges could go and land, and there's examples from here in the States and overseas where it's done. So it's not a huge lift, but it just requires working with the park district, with the city, and with whoever's going to give us a ton of cash to make it happen. And then again, more recommendations on what we could do to, once we connect properties, right, creating trails, examples from here in the States and abroad of what could happen. And then examples of, at the ComEd substation, they have their heavy duty walls, which of course they need to protect the substation, right? That's serious infrastructure. But we have examples of what it could look like, right? You have to have a heavy duty 20-foot wall. You can add art. There are examples of places where it's been done, where it's something that could look nice. And then, examples where we have, local food stands and just places for people to go, and for businesses to open up. We also, our piece with the Canadian National Railroad, right, that would put folks right up against the railroad. There's about 30 feet between the wall and the railroad at Halstead. And that's obviously a concern. But again, there are examples where it's been done right, where you create the right protection and people can use this sections to connect from one side to the other. And again, more art, right? These viaducts can be places that look nice and are inviting. Same thing with our viaducts and underpasses. And then very at the end, we said Pinktown Park is a huge challenge to get outside of Pinktown Park. We have examples already in the city of how you can get under bridges, right? So again, we're not asking for anything crazy, but things that are already being done in the city, downtown and on the north side. And then more recommendations on how to access Pinktown Park. And then our document also lists other areas of opportunity, other things that are happening that can help move our plans forward. And then down at the end, we have a list of opportunity areas where things can be moved forward and recommendations for all that. But again, 90-page document. If you guys want to go through it and see all the nitty-gritty detail, there's a lot of data in there, there's a lot of pictures, but that's the general gist of it, right? Connecting one end to the other. We've identified all the different players, and we're actively working with a lot of them to move this stuff forward. There's a Pilsen organization called Perro, which is in the final stages of getting a grant from Green Latinos, and their goal is to make improvements to Canal Origins Park, which is right here on Ashland. Hoping that goes through and they will get money to make actual improvements, and they're going to use our framework plan to help to guide that stuff. And again, we're working with the 11th and 12th Ward and 25th Ward to move some of these changes forward.
Thanks, Lario.
Yeah, that's it, guys. Again, you have the framework plan if you want to go through it.
That was a lot of great information, Lario. Definitely grateful for you to just go through it very briefly and explain kind of the process, the community engagement, the recommendations, a lot of good stuff. People definitely check it out. I don't see any questions in the chat, so if anybody does have any questions, please drop it in the chat for Lario. If you want to come off mute, that is fine as well. We got about 7 minutes left, but thank you so much, Eladio. That was really great.
My pleasure. Yeah, and the document has a bunch of examples of what, stuff under viaducts can look like, other places that have done it, right, that have made these ugly pieces of infrastructure look interesting and inviting.
Just want to open it up for anybody. If anybody has any questions for Eladio or something with what Matt had discussed, we're happy to answer any questions now. Comment from Laura. I don't get down to this area much, but this is certainly an incentive to do so. And that is 100% right. It's build it and people will come.
Yeah, I mean, even if you go to a part that's already built out, like Pington Park, beautiful park right next to Chinatown, you can go get your boba tea, walk over to the park and see what we would like the rest of it to look like. Oh, I forgot to mention, we did recently, were awarded a grant from the National Park Service. They're working with us on designing wayfinding for the whole stretch and on finding other grants and funding to actually move some of these things forward and actually start, figure out how to acquire some of this land or get easements and actually build some of these things.
That is awesome to hear.
And we are planning some bike and boat tours of our stretch of the river to showcase what's there and what could be there. So we haven't finalized that yet, but we'll make sure to email you all once that stuff is figured out so you can come join us.
Yeah, we're happy to share the date once you guys have a date set for that. People are slowly starting to trickle down. There aren't any more questions. So just to close it off, thank you for those who have joined us. Thank you to our speakers who spent the time here to just talk to us what they're working on. Keep on doing great advocacy and join us for the next one. Thank you all. All right.